The pilot opens on a 34-year-old NEET who dies after skipping his own parents' funeral, gets disowned and kicked out by his siblings, then immediately throws himself in front of a truck to save 3 high schoolers. Basically, the universe's most pathetic redemption arc speedrun. Then, the swap. He wakes up not in a heroic montage, but in a wailing baby's body, full memories and full shame intact. Studio Bind animates the infancy stretch with absurd care, soft lighting, real-time motor development, and a recognizable family unit forming around him. Paul's a swordsman with the impulse control of a teenager. Zenith is a healer with the patience of one. Rudeus discovers chantless magic, the world's polite term for casting whatever you want without paperwork, and within months, he's launching water spheres bigger than himself. Most shows would call that the arc. This one calls it the disclaimer. Because Mushoku Tensei isn't interested in fixing him with a power-up, the point is whether he can outrun the man he used to be. The premise is small, but the promise is enormous. Roxy Migurdia walks into the Grey Rat household, a blue-haired Migurd in oversized robes, and the show finds its first true love letter to a character. She's a water saint rank mage. Technically, Rudeus is superior in every measurable sense, and she has the social grace of a cornered cat. The episode is a tutoring montage threaded with quiet character work, which sounds inert until you realize the show's using these lessons to teach Rudeus' emotional regulation alongside fireballs. He surpasses her embarrassingly fast. Rather than coast on the salary, Roxy does the first teacher thing imaginable. Writes him a recommendation, hands him his first proper magic staff, tells him he's already passed everything she can teach, and just dips out of the village like the world's tiniest Mary Poppins. Studio Bind frames her departure with strange reverence, which the show then weaponizes into one of anime's most enduring running jokes. Rudeus' lifelong worship of this woman bordering on actual theology, complete with shrines. The infamous panty enshrinement scene is here, played for the deeply uncomfortable laugh that it earns. But under the gag is something sincere. Roxy taught him magic, sure. She also taught him that some people might be worth showing up for. The kid is changing, he just doesn't know it yet. Rudeus, now confident enough to leave the house alone, wanders into a moment most kids never get past. The green-haired quarter-elf, beast and human mutt of a kid getting pelted with mud balls by the village's worst children. Enter Sylphiette. Rudy steps in, lights up the bullies with chantless magic that absolutely shouldn't be in a 6-year-old's repertoire, and walks her home. What follows is the most disarming friendship the medium has produced in years. He teaches her magic in secret. He assumes she's a boy. They train, they share lunches, they invent the kind of bond that only forms when 2 lonely kids decide to be the only thing each other needs. The episode ends on the softest cliffhanger in the season. Nothing exploded, nobody died, but something irreversible just happened. Now, this is the show quietly stating its thesis. Connection is the actual magic system here. So, you think episode 4 is just another chill, peaceful chapter? Well, you're wrong. Emergency family meeting drops an absolute bombshell that threatens to completely tear the Grey Rat household apart. Our guy Paul, the supposed family man, makes a massive, unforgivable blunder. He ends up getting the loyal family maid Lilia pregnant. The tension is incredibly thick. Zenith is absolutely furious, rightfully ready to burn the whole house down, while Paul is sweating bullets, completely powerless to fix the disaster that he's created. Lilia is fully preparing to be thrown out into the streets. Enter Rudeus. Instead of panicking like a normal kid, he activates his adult brain and boldly steps right into the absolute crossfire. He brilliantly manipulates the situation, playing on Zenith's compassion by framing Lilia as a helpless victim of Paul's uncontrollable lust. It's a masterclass in psychological chess. He effortlessly convinces Zenith into forgiving them, securing Lilia's place in the home, and literally saving the family from sudden destruction. But this isn't just a misunderstanding. It's a massive reality check. It proves that his parents are deeply flawed, messy humans, and that Rudy is willing to shoulder the heavy emotional burden to keep his word intact. If you took a fire alarm, gave it red hair, and dressed it like nobility, you'd get Eris Boreas Grey Rat. Rudeus is hired by Soros, Eris's grandpa and the feudal lord of the entire Fitoa region and head of House Boreas, to tutor his granddaughter at the Boreas mansion, and within 90 seconds of meeting her, he's been punched out an actual window. The episode is mostly a comedy of escalating violence, but it's doing 2 jobs at once, introducing the most physical character in the entire series and showing that Rudeus, for all his arrogance, has no real read on people his own age yet. He spent 2 lifetimes around adults. A teenage girl with rage issues is a genre he hasn't studied. Ghislaine, a Sword King tier beast race swordsman who's also hilariously completely illiterate and innumerate, looms in the background like a tired older sister with a katana. The mansion's politics start to bleed in around the edges, hinting at why Eris is the way she is. The course shifts gears here, okay? Lessons stop being abstract and start being live combat. Rudeus is going to have to teach Eris in a language she actually understands. Spoiler, that language has a lot of bruises in it. An episode where almost nothing major happens, and that's the point, I guess. The town of Renoa breathes for 20 minutes. Markets, food, kids being kids, and the show uses the calm to do the heavy lifting it can't do in combat scenes. Rudeus and Eris poke around the city. Ghislaine watches from a respectful distance, doing the bodyguard equivalent of a parent reading on a park bench. There's a birthday gift. There's a moment of unexpected tenderness from a child who has, until this episode, expressed affection, mostly through right hooks. Studio Bind treats the whole thing like a slice of life director got handed the season for a day, and you can feel them stretching out. The music goes warm, the color palette goes warmer, and the audience finally sees Eris as something other than the chaos in the red ribbon. By the time the credits roll, the friendship between these two has shifted into something neither of them would be brave enough to name. It's a small episode in a big show, and exactly the kind of breather Mushoku Tensei is good enough to earn. Now we get the training arc that doesn't lie to you. Eris is taught to read. She's taught swordsmanship by Ghislaine, who has the patience of a wall and the explanatory style of a wall hitting you. Rudeus drills her in magic with the unhinged focus of someone using teaching as therapy for his own past failures. The episode is mostly montage, but the show resists every cliched shortcut. There's no overnight transformation, no shouted breakthrough, no convenient flashback to make Eris's growth feel cheap. She earns every inch of this. The runtime is interleaved with small, weirder moments. Eris quietly reading out aloud, Rudeus realizing he's a worse teacher than Roxy was, Ghislaine offering one sentence of wisdom that lands harder than any of the lectures. The trio's dynamic crystallizes here in a way you don't fully appreciate until the next episode rips it away from you. By the closing minutes, the kids are ready for something. The show, of course, is preparing to throw them at something else entirely. That's the thing about training arcs in Mushoku Tensei. They always end up being preparation for the wrong fight. Alright, so episode 8 is where the training wheels don't just come off, they get violently ripped away and thrown into a wood chipper. For a while, things are actually looking up. Rudy has spent the last few years in the Futoa region working as a tutor for his fiery tsundere cousin Eris. Against all odds, they've gone from practically killing each other to forming a genuine trusting bond. They survive kidnapping plots, level up their skills, and actually celebrate Rudy's 10th birthday. It feels like we're settling into a comfortable, predictable fantasy groove. But this is Mushoku Tensei, and comfort is a lie. The very next day, the series drops Turning Point 1 on our heads with zero warning. A colossal apocalyptic pillar of mana suddenly rips through the sky. There's no big villain monologue, no chance to fight back, just sheer blinding devastation. The mana calamity swallows the entire Futoa region whole, erasing towns from the map and indiscriminately teleporting every single living soul across the farthest, deadliest corners of the globe. In the blink of an eye, the cozy prologue is completely vaporized. The real unforgiving story has officially begun, and nobody is safe. Stranded, scared, and out of options, Rudeus and Eris stumble into one of the show's most important figures. Rudeus Superdia, last surviving warrior of a race the entire continent has been taught to hate. He's 7 feet of green-haired guilt with a spear and a soft spot for children. The episode is the slow, careful work of 3 damaged people deciding to trust each other, and the show takes its time letting that trust feel like a real decision rather than a plot beat. The Dead End Party is born here. They named the adventuring party Dead End, which is literally the slur people use for superb warriors, and turn it into a hero brand on purpose. Eris is more frightened of him than anything else in her life, and Rudeus for once has to be the diplomat. The dynamic that follows, a kid magician, a feral noble girl, and a tragic immortal, will carry the entire arc. And Studio Bind sells it almost entirely through body language. By the time they share their first meal together, you've forgotten how recently the world ended. That's the trick Mushoku Tensei keeps pulling. It rebuilds faster than it breaks. Adventurers Guild paperwork is rarely interesting. Mushoku Tensei makes it count anyway. The trio registers, takes their first official quest, and within 20 minutes, Eris kills something for the first time. The show, importantly, doesn't soundtrack this as a triumph. There's no power fantasy crescendo, no slow-mo pose, no smirking exchange of glances. Just a young girl with a sword that's heavier than it was an hour ago, and an older warrior who knows exactly what she's feeling, because Rudeus, who's been carrying the weight for over 500 years, Eris finally lets himself feel something resembling hope. Rudeus sits her down. He explains in language a 12-year-old can carry, what it costs to take a life and what to do with that cost. It's one of the quietest, most adult scenes any seasonal anime has produced. The episode also handles guild logistics, party tactics, and rank-up mechanics with surprising patience, treating the bureaucracy like world-building rather than filler. By the time the credits roll on this one, Dead End has its first guild stamp and Eris has a wound the rank-up screen will never measure. The mission was easy, but the lesson was not. The Core 1 finale is the show catching its breath while you catch yours. Dead End racks up jobs across the demon continent, building a reputation, a working rhythm, and a small surplus of coin. The episode is paced like a montage with a heartbeat, intercutting quiet snippets with quiet conversations around a campfire. Eris keeps asking questions she didn't know she had. Rudeus just kept deflecting feelings he doesn't want to examine. Rudeus keeps doing the work of a parent neither of them realized they needed. Studio Bind sneaks in some of the season's best background art here. Alien skies, weird flora, ruined civilizations the show never bothers to name, and the result is a continent that feels pretty enormous. By the end, the trio has direction, money, and a vague heading toward they finally hit Windport, the one and only ferry stop of the demon continent. The course signs off without a cliffhanger, which is a flex in itself. It just trusts you to come back after. After 11 episodes of premise shifting, character building, and one continent-wide catastrophe, the show has earned that trust. Curtains down on part 1. The road home hasn't even properly started. Part 2 opens with one of the strangest cameos in the series. Kishirika Kishirisu, ancient demon empress and current disheveled drifter, materializes, asking for food and proceeds to hand out body mod powers like fast food coupons. Rudeus, ever the opportunist, ends up with the demon Eye of Foresight, which starts at maybe a second of premonition and eventually scales up to about 10 seconds with enough mana, assuming his opponent isn't unpredictable enough to scramble it. The episode plays the encounter for laughs, which is the right call, because the show needs the comic relief before it dives back into that slog. But the gift is doing the real work under the hood. Rudeus is now meaningfully more dangerous, and the show is quietly powering him up for the demands of the road ahead. There's also some lovely world building here, with Kishirika's babbling lore dumps actually paying off seasons later if you're paying attention. Eris and Rudeus hover around the edges, mostly bewildered. It's a transitional episode, light on stakes and heavy on charm, and the show is calmly reminding you that this universe has more weirdness in it than it has time to explain. Buckle in, the world's about to get bigger. So, Rudy, Eris, and our absolute Chad Rudeus are officially rolling as the party Dead End. They're stranded on the unforgiving demon continent, scraping by and hustling through shady jobs. Rudy's out here making incredibly tough moral calls just to keep everyone fed and moving forward. They finally make it to the coastal city of Windport, desperately trying to figure out a way across the massive ocean. But you know what the absolute most agonizing part of this entire arc is? It's not the scary monsters or the crippling poverty, it's the tragic, heartbreaking missed connections. Enter Roxy. She's out here literally scouring the ends of the earth alongside Elinalise and Talhan to find our boy. And in Windport, she's walking through the exact same streets. I'm not kidding you. They're mere inches away from each other. But the world of Mushoku Tensei is massive and is unspeakably cruel. They slip right past one another like ghosts in the crowd. It's an excruciatingly close call that completely breaks your heart into pieces. A quest that looks too good to be true turns out to be exactly that, and Dead End walks into the kind of con job that the guild handbook should probably have a chapter on. The episode is a tight, contained little adventure that uses its hour to do 3 things at once: develop party tactics, demonstrate how dirty politics work in this universe, and tee up an ethical question Rudeus answers with surprising maturity. The actual job involves shipping cargo that isn't what it looks like, with employers who are exactly what they look like. There's a fight, there's a moral judgment call, there's the kind of quiet competence from Rudeus that makes you want a spin-off where he just walks around the world solving low-level problems. The episode also lets Eris flex her combat development without making a big deal of it, which is the show's best mode, progress without fanfare. It's a single arc episode, perfectly self-contained, doing the unglamorous work of proving that this universe has texture even when nothing world historical is happening. Solid hour this one, the kind of episode you only appreciate on a rewatch. Dead End reaches the Dolia village, the beast race settlement where Ghislaine grew up, and the show takes the title at its word. This is 20 minutes of breathing room, cultural world building, tail jokes, Eris discovering that she fits in here in a way she didn't in noble society. The villagers don't know what to make of a soup herd in their midst, but they're polite about it, and Rudeus gets the closest thing to community he's experienced in centuries. There's a beautifully understated subplot about how Eris connects with the beast race kids almost immediately, which says something the script never has to verbalize about about who she actually is underneath the noble title. Studio Bind goes off here on background design, huts, totems, dappled forest light, and the village feels lived in within 5 minutes of screen time. The plot barely moves here. The party barely fights, and yet by the end, you feel like you spent a week with these people, and Dead End feels less like 3 lost travelers and more like an actual found family. Slow in the best sense, this one, and in every sense. After crossing actual oceans and surviving the absolute worst the demon continent had to offer, Dead End finally sets foot on the Millis continent. They reach the city of Militian, and in episode 16, the moment we've all been waiting for finally happens. Rudy bumps right into his dad, Paul. You're probably bracing yourself for the classic tear-jerking anime reunion, right? Maybe some dramatic slow motion and a warm hug? Absolutely not. Instead, the narrative delivers a raw, painfully realistic gut punch. Paul is completely hollowed out. The sheer trauma of losing his entire family and shouldering the crushing weight of a massive search and rescue operation has completely broken him. When he sees Rudy looking relatively fine and casually adventuring without a care in the world, Paul completely snaps. He violently lashes out, and what follows is a brutal, heart-wrenching fistfight in the middle of the street. He beats the absolute crap out of Rudy, tearing into him both physically and emotionally. It's devastating to watch because neither of them is actually entirely wrong here, but they're both hurting so much. The reunion is a traumatic train wreck that leaves Rudy completely shattered. Following the absolute emotional massacre of the previous episode, this episode forces everyone to deal with the messy, uncomfortable hangover. Rudy is left completely broken, spiraling into a deep depression after being physically and verbally battered by the one person he thought would be overjoyed to see him. But this is exactly where the series flexes its masterful character writing. Enter Geese, who steps up as the absolute MVP. He sits Paul down and gives him a massive, much-needed reality check, reminding him that Rudy might be a magical prodigy, but he's still just a literal child who barely survived a hostile continent. When the two finally meet again, it's one of the most sobering, cathartic moments in the entire series. There's no epic background music or flashy animation, just two deeply flawed human beings stripping away their massive egos. Paul breaks down, admitting his massive failures as a father, and they finally share the tearful, desperate embrace they should have had from the very start. It's a raw, messy, and profoundly beautiful display of a real father-son relationship. They reconcile not as perfect heroes, but just as family. The reunion ends in a parting, which is the kind of cruelty Mushoku Tensei specializes in. Paul has his rescue mission. Dead End has its trajectory home. The two paths don't overlap anymore, and the episode is mostly the slow, sober work of saying goodbye. There's logistics, letters, intel, supplies, and there's a quieter undercurrent of Rudeus realizing that he's not actually a child anymore, even if his body says otherwise. The decision to keep traveling without his father is the first properly grown-up call he makes in the series, and the show treats it with appropriate weight. Eris is sharper this episode, watching her own family situation reflect back at her in unexpected ways. Rudeus, as ever, says less than anyone and conveys more. The episode's last shot is the trio walking out of town, with Paul on a different road heading the other way, and the framing is generous enough to let you mourn the path not taken. The road home is somehow longer now than it was at the start of the core. The map didn't change, the travelers did. A logistics episode which sounds dull until you remember Mushoku Tensei's whole personality is making logistics feel like character work. The party is debating how to cross back to the central continent, a sea route fast and expensive, an overland trek slow and brutal. The debate is undercut with side errands, small fights, and the kind of road trip texture that's becoming the core's house style. There's a lovely sequence where Rudeus does the actual maths on costs versus risks, and the show treats his economic thinking with the same care it gives sword choreography. Eris weighs in with surprising practicality, having spent enough months on the road to lose the noble girl's instinct for grand gestures. Rudeus defers because Rudeus defers about everything that isn't a moral question. The episode also slips in a brief, unsettling vision through Rudeus' demon eye, a glimpse of a future he won't understand for another 2 cores, and Studio Bind lights it like a horror movie. Decisions get made, bags get packed, the journey reorients towards a port that will reshape everything. Plot calmly advancing in a straight line. The wildest title to content ratio in the season. Through a series of brisk flashbacks and exposition, the show introduces Aisha, Rudeus' half-sister, daughter of Paul and Lilia, raised in a household where her mother insisted she be brought up as a maid rather than a noble. The episode is structurally daring, a domestic side story unfolding in a different timeline than the main party, used to set up family stakes that the core's finale will cash in on. Aisha's introduction is short, sharp, and immediately memorable. She's prematurely competent, unsettlingly composed, and clearly going to be one of the show's most important characters once the writers get her on the main stage. The episode also threads in Norm, the legitimate younger sister, and the contrast between the two halves of the Grey Rat family is laid out with surprising delicacy. Lilia, often a footnote in lesser shows, gets her due here. By the end, you understand the Grey Rats aren't a family unit so much as a series of partial overlaps held together by Paul's bad decisions and Zenith's patience. The core's emotional architecture just got considerably more crowded. Dead End is finally making it back to civilization. The journey is almost over, the finish line is in sight, and then the narrative just says, LMAO, absolutely not. Welcome to Turning Point 2. The party crosses paths with Orsted, the dragon god. And trust me, this isn't a fight. It's a one-sided slaughter. Orsted doesn't just beat our hardened veteran party, he completely humiliates them. He casually swats aside both Rudeus and Eris like they're literal gnats, snapping their weapons and their confidence in seconds. Then he turns his attention to Rudy and straight up punches a hole through his chest, turning our main character into a human donut. Rudy literally dies here. The screen goes dark. It's only because Orsted's mysterious companion, Nanahoshi, casually asks him to spare the kid that our boy gets revived. It's a terrifying, deeply traumatizing reality check that violently reminds Rudy just how small and utterly powerless he really is. They finally step foot into the devastated empty wastelands of the Fitoa region, but the emotional damage from that encounter is gonna last a lifetime. The episode the discourse has been arguing about since the day it aired. After the trauma of the Fitoa homecoming, Eris and Rudeus share a night together that the show treats with deliberate, uncomfortable seriousness. It is romantic, it is awkward. It's two teenagers who've been through more than most adults survive, trying to give each other something that isn't grief. Mushoku Tensei doesn't flinch from the scene, and it doesn't sensationalize it either. The framing is intimate, the sound design is restrained, and the morning after silence is louder than anything they said in the dark. The episode interleaves the central event with quieter material. Rudeus, already aware, the party's dynamic visibly shifting, Rudeus' internal monologue cycling between wonder and dread. You can feel the show setting up its next hammer blow even as it lets this moment breathe. Whatever you think of the discourse, the craft is not in question. Studio Bind lights the entire night sequence like a memory you're not sure you're allowed to keep. It's beautiful, it's complicated, and it lasts roughly 19 minutes before the next episode burns it down. Rudeus wakes up alone. Eris is gone. There's a note. The note's short, devastating, and exactly the kind of thing a teenager would write when she's decided she has to be stronger than the boy she loves before she can come back to him. The core finale is mostly the aftermath. Rudeus shuts down, Rudeus unsure how to help. The demon eye doing nothing useful against a wound this size. The infamous psychogenic dysfunction subplot lands here, and the show treats it with the same matter-of-fact dignity it treats everything else, refusing to play it for laughs and refusing to play it for shock. Slowly, painfully, with a lot of help he doesn't want, Rudeus picks himself up. He decides to enroll at the Renoa University of Magic, partly because Roxy recommended it years ago, partly because he needs something, anything, to take a step forward. The finale doesn't end on a hype shot, it ends on him walking. One foot, then the other. Title card, black screen. A season of growth boiled down to a single quiet act. The show earns it completely. Season 2 opens with the prequel episode nobody requested and everybody needed. Sylphiette's story from the Mana calamity onwards. She's teleported alone to a remote noble estate, hair-grown silver from terror, mistaken for a boy, and quickly absorbed into the household of Princess Ariel of Asura as a personal bodyguard under the name Fitz. The owl rebuilds her from soft childhood friend into a quietly capable knight, and the transformation is paced so carefully, you almost don't notice the show's doing it. She trains in magic, she studies politics, she survives an assassination attempt that recontextualizes the entire Asura kingdom subplot. By the end of the episode, she's a different person than the one Rudeus said goodbye to in Core 1, and the show has, with surgical efficiency, made you care about her all over again. Studio Bind handles Ariel with the kind of regal portrait work the season relies on for its political layer, and Luke, third member of their little entourage, gets just enough screen time to register. It's a slow burn of an opening for a slow burn of a core, worth every minute. Core 1 proper picks up on Rudeus, alone, drifting around the central continent and emotionally somewhere between functioning and a sigh. The episode is essentially a road movie compressed into 20 minutes, and the show is unflinching about how broken he still is. The dysfunction, the avoidance, the cycle of half-attempted relationships that go nowhere. He's clearly trying, but he hasn't found the shape of a life yet. Then a letter from Roxy reroutes him towards the Renoa University of Magic. A chance encounter on the road introduces Elinalise, the lust-cursed adventurer, and suddenly the narrative has direction again. Studio Bind handles the color grading like a tonal map, muted greys when Rudeus is stuck, warmer pigments the second he commits to motion. Elinalise herself is a great addition, a centuries-old elf with a humiliating curse and zero patience for self-pity, and her dynamic with Rudeus works immediately. The hour ends with him properly deciding to go north. The broken-hearted mage isn't healed at the credits, he's just facing in a direction. After Last Call's ending, that's already a win. An adventuring episode that doubles as a character audit. Rudeus and Elinalise are on the road to Renoa, and the show uses the journey to demonstrate exactly how good of an adventurer Rudeus has actually become. Efficient, deadly, weirdly responsible for someone supposedly travelling with a cursed companion. The forest is full of nasties, the night is full of complications, and Studio Bind takes obvious joy in animating combat at a level a TV anime really shouldn't be hitting. Elinalise gets her first proper introduction here too, and the show handles her curse with a tonal balance most series would fumble. The consequences are real, the comedy is honest, and the dignity is never sacrificed. There's a quiet subplot about how Rudeus's demon eye has matured since the last core, plus a few smaller moments where his trauma surfaces in combat rather than in dialogue. Mushoku Tensei has always been good at letting battle do character work. By the time dawn breaks and the pair are back on the road, the season has casually proven that its action chops aren't slipping. Good hour. Patient setup. Rudeus arrives at the Renoa University of Magic, and the show shifts genre on you almost immediately. After 2 cores of survival travel, we're suddenly in a school anime, and the tonal whiplash is part of the joke. The administrative chaos, the matriculation paperwork, the polite but fascinated stares from students who can sense exactly how much combat experience the newcomer is carrying around. The episode mines all of it for low-stakes comedy. Then, Fitz appears. The audience knows, Rudeus does not. The disguise is doing more heavy lifting than it has any right to, and the show leans into the absurdity with affection rather than smugness. There's a brief, electric encounter between the two of them where Sylphiette has to keep her composure while Rudeus has the genre-savvy capacity of a brick. Studio Bind lights her exits like a music video. Around them, the university begins to take shape. The dorms, the library, the rival students sniffing for status. By the end of the episode, we have a campus, a setting, and a slow-burn romance with all the brakes pressed. Class in session, patience is mandatory. Rudeus' status at Renoa is suddenly clarified, and not in a small way. He presents Roxy's old letter of recommendation to the school, and the staff respond with a careful deference reserved for people who turn out to be considerably more dangerous than expected. He's classified as a special student, a designation that comes with privileges, responsibilities, and a target on his back. The episode is partly administrative, forms, classroom assignments, a guided tour of the more esoteric corners of the institution, and partly the introduction of the season's deeper roster. Nanahoshi, the Otherworlder, appears here briefly with a kind of presence that tells you she's going to matter. Cliff Grimoire, the smug little 3/4 human, 1/4 hobbit prodigy, who also happens to be the grandson of the actual Pope of the Miller's Church, yeah, that Pope. The show is widening out, populating a campus that's going to host the next dozen hours of story, and it's doing the unglamorous work of making sure every supporting character lands with at least one defining quirk. The episode is, in short, scaffolding, but the scaffolding is gorgeous, and the building underneath it is starting to look enormous. School life proper. The episode is structured like a series of vignettes, each one fleshing out a corner of campus culture, and the cumulative effect is that Renoa starts to feel like a real place rather than a backdrop. There's a magical dueling demonstration that lets Rudeus accidentally humiliate someone he didn't mean to humiliate. There's a library scene where Cliff explains the kingdom's magical politics with the breathless enthusiasm of a man who's never even been listened to. There's a brief, lovely beat with Fitz that gestures towards how much Sylphiette is doing emotionally while pretending to be unbothered. Studio Bind treats the campus like a character of its own. Cloister walks, candlelit corridors, lecture halls in slanting afternoon light, and the world feels appropriately scholarly. The episode also threads in Nanahoshi's research subplot with a tack that won't pay off until much later. It's an hour of quiet world stocking, the kind of episode that's easy to underestimate on a first watch and impossible to imagine cutting on a rewatch. The university is now functioning as a setting. Now the show can start putting pressure on it. The core gets its first proper teeth here. Two upperclassmen beast race students, Linnea and Persina, have decided Rudeus needs to be put in his place, and they orchestrate an ambush in the kind of bad faith ritual the school's politics tolerate. The episode plays the first half as a stalking comedy and the second half as a horror short, which sounds incompatible until you actually see it executed. Rudeus, for the first time in months, is forced back into actual combat mode, and the demon eye comes out in earnest. The fight choreography is fast and unfussy. The threat is real enough that Rudeus' old trauma surfaces in flashes, which the show wisely doesn't over-explain. By the end of the encounter, the two attackers have learned a lesson they very much didn't sign up for, and Rudeus has, in the only language he speaks properly, announced himself on campus. The episode ends on an unsettling note, with the consequences of his counteraction drawing the attention of larger players. The university just learned that the quiet new student is, in fact, a lot of things. Quiet is not one of them. The title sounds like a content warning. The execution is mostly comedy, mercifully. Rudeus turns the tables on Linnea and Persina, but rather than punish them physically, he subjugates them via the beast race custom of pack hierarchy, essentially conscripting them into his service as social subordinates. The episode treats the cultural mechanic with a straight face, which is the only way to make it work, and it lets the two beast girls keep their dignity while reorienting them into something closer to bumbling allies and antagonists. There's a lot of broad comedy here, cat ears, hierarchical confusion, Persina's reaction shot specifically deserving an award, but the show also uses the hour to show how Rudeus' approach to power has shifted. He doesn't humiliate, he doesn't escalate. He just structures the situation so that further conflict isn't profitable for anyone. That's a different man than the one who got punched out by a window by Eris 4 cores ago. Around the comedy, Fitz watches from a distance, processing. The romance plot is moving, even when it isn't moving. Light hour, heavier than it looks. Cliff Grimoire's storyline finally arrives, and it brings the show's most underrated romantic subplot with it. Cliff, the dwarven prodigy with delusions of statesmanship, is courting Elinalise. Yes, that Elinalise with the curse and the experience and roughly 4 centuries of head start on him. The episode plays their dynamic with surprising tenderness, refusing the obvious mismatched comedy beats and letting the relationship grow into something genuinely sweet. Cliff's earnestness is mostly the joke and mostly the heart. The hour also widens the campus politics considerably, sketching in the kingdom of Asura's looming succession crisis and the way Princess Ariel's exile at Renoa is anything but the safe holiday that it actually looks like. Fitz's role in all of this is becoming uncomfortable to watch. She's holding more weight than any of her friends realise, and her composure is starting to crack at the seams. Studio Bind handles the parallel storylines deftly, cross-cutting Cliff's awkward courtship with Ariel's increasingly tense political calculus. By the end of the episode, the romantic comedy and the political thriller are clearly going to merge. Quiet, dense, propulsive in a way you only see on the rewatch. An interlude episode that does a remarkable amount of structural work in a short runtime. The white mask of the title refers to a figure who's been gliding around the edges of the core like a ghost, and the show finally lets the audience and Rudeus put together the pieces of who's wearing it and why. The reveal is less about shock and more about confirmation. You suspect it for a while, and the show's generous enough to let your suspicion be correct. Around the central mystery, the episode keeps the romance simmering, lets Cliff and Elinalise have a beautifully understated moment, and gives Nanahoshi a flicker of new information about her possible return home. The animation noticeably tightens for this episode. Fewer big set pieces, more careful character framing, the kind of restraint that telegraphs a budget being saved for something later. Rudeus, for his part, is closer than he's been in 3 cores to actually allowing himself to feel something he can name. He doesn't know it yet. Fitz absolutely does. The episode signs off on the quiet before a kind of storm. 2 more weeks, get ready. The romance plot pries its lid open. Rudeus has spent enough time around Fitz that the relationship has stopped being a courtesy and started being a thing he thinks about when he's alone. The episode is structured around a handful of small moments that individually look like nothing. A shared lunch, a misplaced touch, a conversation that ends a sentence too late, and cumulatively becoming a confession in waiting. Sylphiette, meanwhile, is unraveling in slow motion. She has every reason to want to tell him. She has every reason to be terrified. The dysfunction subplot resurfaces here too, with surprising tenderness rather than the usual joke treatment. Rudeus is in genuine doubt that he can be the kind of partner anyone deserves, and the show lets him sit in that doubt without rushing him out of it. Around the central pair, the supporting cast keeps churning. Nanahoshi's research lurches forward, Ariel's politics tighten, Cliff and Elinalise quietly become the most stable couple in the show. By the end of the hour, 2 confessions are loaded. The trigger gets pulled next episode. Hold your breath. Sylphiette finally decides she's done waiting. The episode is largely interior. Her perspective, her preparation, the agonizing private rehearsal of words she's been carrying since the day she was teleported away from him. Studio Bind animates her quiet moments with the care normally reserved for action set pieces, and the result is the most affecting interior monologue the season produces. The romance, when it pivots, doesn't pivot on a grand gesture. It pivots on her deciding she'd rather be known than safe. The reveal sequence is staged with restraint, a removed disguise, a quiet name, the way Rudeus' face does something his words can't keep up with. Around the central reveal, the show keeps things moving. Ariel's plans tighten further. Nanahoshi makes a quiet decision about her own future. Cliff says something only Cliff would say at the worst possible time, but the episode belongs to Sylphiette. It belongs more accurately to the version of her who's been waiting half a season to be visible again. The core penultimate doesn't end on a cliffhanger, it ends on a homecoming, hidden inside a confession. The finale of Core 1 closes the loop the entire core has been winding. Rudeus and Sylphiette, no longer fits and not yet a couple, work through everything that's happened between them across 2 cores and 2 continents. There is awkwardness. There's grief for the version of childhood they didn't get to keep. There's the careful, frightened negotiation of what they want now, as people who have both spent years assuming the other might be dead. The episode resists every available shortcut. No power of love montage, no sweeping confessions on a hilltop, no tidy bow either. They talk, they cry, they make decisions that will shape the rest of both of their lives. By the end of the hour, they're engaged, and the engagement feels earned in a way modern anime romances almost never bother to earn. Studio Bind handles the proposal with a quiet generosity that lets the audience exhale. Around the central couple, the core's other plots are left deliberately open. Zenith, Aisha, Norn, the Asura politics, Nanahoshi's research, Core 2 is going to be busy. Right now, briefly, 2 people get to be happy. Curtain on part 1. Core 2 opens with the kind of episode you only get when a show genuinely trusts its audience. Rudeus and Sylphia are newly engaged and now living together, and the hour is mostly the wholesome, slightly mortifying domestic logistics of 2 people learning to share a home. Furniture is bought, routines are negotiated. Sylphia discovers Rudeus' deeply concerning collection of memorabilia and chooses not to flee the country. There's a brief, lovely scene where they realize neither of them has actually had stable accommodation since the Mana calamity, and the home's doing something larger than housing them. Studio Bind handles the slice of life beats with affectionate detail. A kettle, a curtain, a window that opens the wrong way, and the result is 20 minutes of texture that the rest of the core will reference back to repeatedly. Around the domesticity, the show seeds the season's bigger plots. A letter from Paul arrives, news of an expedition starts surfacing, Nanahoshi's research is heating up, but the episode itself is content to let the engaged couple have a quiet week. They've earned it. The catastrophe can wait one more episode. The wedding episode. Friends gather, food served, speeches are given, and the show throws a party with the same care it would throw a battle. The ceremony itself is brief and tasteful. The reception is where the hour earns its title, an ensemble episode dropping in on virtually every supporting character of the season, each given a small moment that lands. Cliff embarrasses himself beautifully. Elinalise gives a toast that's both inappropriate and structured perfectly. Princess Ariel quietly reveals more political stakes than anyone present is comfortable acknowledging. Nanahoshi shows up, drinks too quickly, and almost says something the audience has been waiting weeks to hear. Studio Bind treats the entire reception like a Renaissance painting, figures arranged in careful triangles, candlelight bouncing off armor and silk, conversation overlapping the way it does at real parties. There's a beautiful, quiet scene late in the hour with Rudeus stepping outside and briefly being overwhelmed by gratitude he doesn't know how to express. The wedding is, in the end, the core's only embellished happy ending. The show knows it. It gives you the joy, undiluted. The bill comes due later. Paul sends word that Zenith might be alive in a labyrinth on the Begarit continent, then drops a surprise package. Norn, Aisha, and Rudeus himself standing at Rudy's front door at the end of the episode. Zenith, Rudeus' mother, missing since the Mana calamity, has been located, alive, trapped in a labyrinth on the Begarit continent. The episode pivots from domestic warmth to expedition planning in a single breath, and the tonal whiplash is intentional. Rudeus, for the first time in the season, has to choose between 2 competing definitions of family, the one he's about to start and the one he spent 2 cores trying to resemble. Sylphiette is the one who tells him to go. The scene is short, generous, and devastating, and it sets the entire emotional architecture for the rest of the core. Around the central decision, the supporting cast assembles itself for the expedition. Roxy appears, Elinalise volunteers, Talhan the dwarf is recruited, Paul is already on Begarit waiting. Studio Bind frames the goodbye sequence between Rudeus and Sylphiette with the kind of quiet you rarely see on weekly TV. The episode title is the name of the song that plays as he walks away. It's a love song, but it's also a warning. Rudy is finally living the absolute dream. The depression arc is officially over, he's happily married to Sylphiette, and life in Renoa is actually looking peaceful. But right before he can get too comfortable, the universe decides he needs a massive crash course in sudden parenting. Rudeus, our absolute gigachad super, suddenly shows up at Rudy's doorstep just long enough to drop off his two little sisters, Aisha and Norn, before immediately dipping back out. Oh man, the family dynamic is an absolute mess. Aisha is a literal prodigy maid who completely adores Rudy, but Norn, she intensely resents him. She still vividly remembers him brutally fighting their dad back in Milician, and the tension in the house is thick enough to cut with a sword. Rudy is suddenly thrust into the incredibly awkward role of a guardian, desperately trying to mend fences with a little sister who wants absolutely nothing to do with him. It's a brilliant, grounded, character-driven episode that forces Rudy to step up and prove he's actually matured. An entire episode of Rudeus trying and largely failing to be a functional older brother to Norn. Norn doesn't like him. She has decent reasons too. The episode lays out in patient detail exactly why years of being overshadowed, of being the lesser prodigy in a family of legends, of a father who couldn't quite hide the disappointment when she didn't manifest the family talent. Rudeus, to his credit, doesn't argue. He listens. He takes the punch. The hour is mostly the two of them learning to occupy the same room, with Sylphiette intervening at exactly the moment she needs to, and Aisha watching from the side with surgical patience. Studio Bind frames a small, late scene of Rudeus apologizing for things he didn't know he'd done, and Norn accepting the apology without trusting it yet, with the kind of care most shows save for romantic confessions. The episode also sees the older brother arc that will carry through into the next season. Norn isn't going to be magically fine, and the show is letting that be okay. Quiet hour this one, important hour. Family is still under construction. If there were ever an episode designed to give you maximum emotional whiplash, this is it. Things actually start off incredibly wholesome. Sylphiette reveals she's pregnant. Rudy's about to become a father, and the hype is absolutely unreal. But because this is Mushoku Tensei, we're not allowed to be happy for more than 5 minutes, are we? Enter Turning Point 3. Guy sends word that the search party has finally located Zenith. She's locked in a crystal at the bottom of a teleport labyrinth on Begarit, and they need Rudy's firepower to bust her out. Rudy and Elinalise pack their bags. The timing is impossibly cruel here. Rudy's forced into the most agonizing, gut-wrenching ultimatum of his entire life. Stay in the safety of his home to support his vulnerable pregnant wife, or dive headfirst into a meat grinder to save his parents and his master. The internal conflict is crushing. Ultimately, making the hardest choice of his life, Rudy packs his bags. With just Elinalise by his side, he sets off for Begarit, walking straight towards tragedy. 20 minutes of desert crossing, and the show treats it like a film that has the time to slow down for. Begarit is hostile in ways the central continent never was. Climate as an antagonist, dehydration as an obstacle, monstrous fauna circling the periphery. The party is in real, ongoing danger from the environment, and Mushoku Tensei has never been particularly interested in pretending journeys take place off-screen. The hour is dense with party dynamic work. Paul and Rudeus repairing their relationship in real time, Roxy negotiating a place in a group that has reconfigured around her several times since they last traveled together, Elinalise's curse causing recurring complications the others have to plan around with surprising grace. There's a lovely sequence where Talhan explains dwarven combat tradition over a campfire, and the camera just lets him talk. Studio Bind paints the desert with confidence, dust storms, mirages, dunes that move, and the result is a landscape that feels properly alien. By the time the labyrinth's entrance comes into view on the horizon, the party is exhausted, bounded, and slightly better at their jobs than they were a week ago. The dungeon awaits. Quiet calm, long breath. The labyrinth of teleportation, and the show finally caches the dungeon crawl chip it's been saving since the first season. The party enters, descends, and immediately the tone of the core changes. Studio Bind treats the labyrinth as a character of its own. Shifting architecture, light that doesn't behave properly, ambient hum that the sound designers clearly had a field day with. The mechanics of the place are explained patiently. Teleport runes that scatter trespassers, layered floors that don't connect rationally, monsters that exist outside the standard ecology. The party works methodically. The episode is mostly small fights, careful spell rotation, and the kind of group competence the show's been building toward for months. There's a wonderful moment where Roxy quietly takes over tactical command without anyone needing to acknowledge it. Paul, watching her work, has the look of a man finally proud of his ex-employee. The hour ends on a checkpoint, a save room of sorts, where the party rests, eats, and shares a single conversation that doubles as a dress rehearsal for the speeches none of them will get to give properly later. Tension's racking up now, floor by floor. Deeper in the labyrinth, the magic gets harder. Roxy takes center stage for this hour, and the show finally gives her the spotlight she's deserved since Core 1 of Season 1. Her speciality, magic circle design and large-scale ritual casting, turns out to be exactly what the party needs to navigate the labyrinth's sixth stratum, and the episode lets her work with the kind of methodical pleasure most shows reserve for showy ultimates. She's brilliant. The party defers to her almost wordlessly. Rudeus watches with the unguarded admiration of a student who never stopped being a student. Around the circle work, the episode threads in smaller character moments. Paul carrying something heavy he hasn't named, Elinalise quietly preparing for the worst, Talhan making jokes that are tactically calibrated to lower the room's blood pressure. Studio Bind frames the magical circles with the eye of someone who loves geometry, every shot a balanced composition. The hour ends on the sound of something enormous breathing on the next floor down. The party has been prepared. The labyrinth is done preparing. The penultimate problem is about to introduce itself. Hold your breath. The party reaches zenith, finds her alive but not present, her body whole, her mind elsewhere. The cost of years inside the labyrinth's magic written across her face. Before they can leave, the floor's guardian arrives, the Manatite Hydra, a monster the show's been quietly foreshadowing for an entire core. The fight that follows is the most agonizing piece of fantasy combat that the series has produced. There's no power-up, there's no clever trick, there's a slow, brutal exchange of damage that the party isn't actually equipped to survive. Paul, in the closing minutes, makes a choice he's been training his entire adult life to make. He saves them, and he pays for it. His death scene is paced with a kind of dignity the show has earned the right to use. No slow motion, no soundtrack swell. Just a man finishing the job he came to do and saying the last things he needs to say. Rudeus holds him. The audience holds its breath. Studio Bind makes the silence afterwards louder than any score. This isn't a triumph, this is the cost. The aftermath. The party climbs out of the labyrinth carrying Zenith's body and Paul's, and the show takes the long way home on purpose. The episode is largely a procession of small, devastating scenes. The funeral, the letters that have to be written, the practical questions of what to do with a mother whose mind has gone. Rudeus is not okay. Roxy's not okay. Elinalise, who's buried more loved ones than anyone in the core, does most of the quiet logistical work and lets the others fall apart on schedule. Paul's body is returned to the family. The eulogy is short. Studio Bind frames the burial sequence with the kind of restrained reverence that suggests the storyboard artists were grieving in real time. Around the grief, the show does its quiet duty. Sets up Non and Aisha's reaction for the next season, lets Rudeus' relationship with Sylphiette absorb the shock from a distance, threads in the early seeds of Zenith's long-term care. The hour signs off on the party returning home in pieces. Not broken, just changed. The journey is over, the reckoning hasn't started. The core finale, the season finale, the pre-season 3 exhale. Rudeus, back in Renoa, has to figure out who he is now. Husband, father-to-be, son to a vegetative mother and a dead father, brother to two sisters who need him to be functional, master to a maid who knows him better than anyone in the building. Roxy, after the labyrinth, has escaped what her presence in his life actually means, and the episode handles her becoming his second wife with the same patience the show has used for every important emotional pivot. Sylphiette's reaction is one of the show's most underrated scenes. Not a love triangle, not a betrayal, just two adults talking through what kind of family they're going to choose to be. Roxy officially becomes wife number 2, and Sylphiette gives birth to Lucy, Rudy's firstborn, Sylphiette's daughter, and the actual heir of the Grey Rat house. Studio Bind animates the birth and the introduction with such warmth, you almost forget the cost the core had just paid. The episode ends not on a hype shot, but on a family photograph, framed and quiet. The succession of the title is generational. Mushoku Tensei has been about this all along. Season 3, dropping this July, is about to make you miss the good old days. The new season kicks off by heavily lulling us into a false sense of security with the everyday life arc. Rudy is back home, desperately trying to juggle a growing family, multiple wives, and actual adult responsibilities. It feels incredibly wholesome. But don't let your guard down for a single second, this is Mushoku Tensei, and happiness is just bait. The narrative is barreling straight toward turning point 4, and trust me, it's the absolute most jaw-dropping, terrifying twist in the entire franchise. We're talking timeline-shattering revelations, a haunting diary from a completely broken future, and the human god making his absolute most sinister, devastating play yet. To protect his family, Rudy is forced to build literal mecha magic armor and throw himself into a completely suicidal rematch against the dragon god Orsted. Oh, and remember Eris, our fierce swordswoman who spent the last years brutally training in isolation? She's finally making her grand, explosive return right when Rudy needs her the most. Season 3 isn't just another adventure, it's an all-out desperate war for survival. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like and let me know any other recap I should make for you. See you in the next one.